Good morning. ಇದೇನು ಹತ್ತವತ್ಲ ಎಲ್ಲ ವೈರ್ ಗೇರ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಇದು ಕಂಪ್ಯೂಟರ್ ಕನೆಕ್ಷನ್ ನೋ ಸಿಗ್ನಲ್ ಔಟ್ಪುಟ್ ಬರುತ್ತೆ ಯಾರ ಯಾಕ ಇಲ್ಲಾಂದ್ರೆ ಇದು ಪೆನ್ ಡ್ರೈವ್ದಾಗಿಂದ ಲ್ಯಾಪ್ಟಾಪ್ನಾಗಿಂದ ತೆಗೆದ ಇದು ಕನೆಕ್ಷನ್ ಕೊಡು ವಿಚಾರ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ Okay, we have discussed about different components of research design, and as mentioned already here, that research design should consist of different types of design. I mean, research design consists of different types of. There are different types of research designs to be specific: exploratory research and descriptive research and causal research. And based on the problems that we have to solve, upon those problems we choose one of these research designs, and then we try to execute our research program. Well, in the last class we have discussed about what is exploratory research and what is descriptive research and what is causal phases of the research, and we have deliberately discussed at length on these things. And in today's class we are not going to discuss about different types of these research. However, we will try to understand what are the differences between exploratory research, causal research and descriptive research and things like that. And in the last class we also have discussed about what are the different types of information that are required. What are the different types of information that are required for conducting the research? Okay, that has to be mentioned in the research design as well. And another important thing is research design should also consist of what is the kind of measurement and what sort of scaling that we are going to adopt. As discussed in the last class, we need to specifically specify what sort of measurements that we are going to do. How you are going to measure the variables. Okay, so we have different types of variables in the business, as we already know. We have dichotomous variables, we have continuous variables, we have These are the two different types of variables. One is the continuous variables and another one is the dichotomous variables. But then within these continuous variables, again there are different types. Certain variables are qualitative in nature and certain other variables are quantitative in nature. What do we understand by qualitative and quantitative? Quantitative variables are those which can be measured in terms of numbers. Okay, for example, sales is a quantitative variable. Another variable is expenditure incurred for marketing. That's also a quantitative variable. Number of people that have been recruited, that's also a quantitative variable. Customer satisfaction. Can we measure customer satisfaction in terms of number? Then it is no. The answer is no. I mean, it is very subjective in nature. We can't say that customers are satisfied like say 10, 15 and things like that. So which is nothing but it's a qualitative variable. Okay, so we cannot measure employee satisfaction directly in terms of numbers, and such things are qualitative numbers. These are let's suppose a smell cannot be measured in terms of numbers, whereas the height can be measured in terms of numbers. So height becomes a quantitative variable, whereas the smell becomes the qualitative variable. Well, what sort of variables that we are having here in our research design that we have to discuss, and apart from that, what sort of measurements and what sort of scaling that we are going to use in order to measure those variables. That deliberation, a brief about that has to be included in the research design. Okay. Going forward, apart from that, the research design also consists of the questionnaires for collecting the appropriate information. To collect the appropriate information, we need to have a questionnaire. Okay, so whether the questionnaire is properly connected or not, that has to be discussed. All right. Well, we have a brief questionnaire, and this pre-testing of this questionnaire is quite essential. Whether the questionnaire is capturing all the elements of the objectives or not, that has to be deliberated. Okay, and apart from that, the research design also consists of the sampling process and the sampling size. As discussed in the last class, we have different types of samplings. There is a random sampling, there is judgmental sampling, and there is a snowball sampling, and there is a stratified sampling. There are different types of sampling. Which type of sampling that we are going to use in our research, that has to be mentioned. Okay, and apart from that, we need to also mention about the sample size, the total number of respondents, the total number of subjects to whom we are going to interview. Now, it's very essential for us to understand an adequate amount of sample size is very important. And adequacy is very, very important in terms of whenever we are talking about sample size, we need to use particular formulas. So by this way, we will understand, we will find out what are the possible adequate sample size. As we know, friends, sample size should not be very high. It should not be very high, or it should not be very low as well. If it is very high, then it is going to take a lot of time in order to collect the information from those, then the very purpose of sampling gets beaten up. It cannot be low as well because it will not completely represent the population. Okay, the sample size should be selected in such a way that it should not be burden on the researcher. It should not be burden on the researcher in order to collect the information from these subjects. Or it should not be so less that it will be very inadequate representation of the entire population. So it shouldn't happen that way. So therefore, we need to specify sampling process and the sampling size as well. What is the type of sampling process that we have taken, and what is the formula that we have used for calculating the sample size. Now there are different types of sampling processes, as I just mentioned. Now let's say I'm going to use a stratified sampling method. Now I need to validate For what purpose? Why I am choosing only stratified sampling as a sampling process for this research? There has to be a proper validation. A researcher cannot randomly choose any kind of a sampling process just because he knows that sampling size. I mean, this sampling process is very much dependent on the kind of research that you are undertaking. Okay, let's suppose you are taking some research which is related to economics, and it is related to a huge population. Probably that time we might consider a convenient sampling. That time we probably might consider a judgmental sampling for that matter. I mean, it is very subjective in nature. The sampling process has to be chosen in accordance with the kind of research that we do. Okay, so similarly, sampling sizes, I mean, there are different sampling sizes as per the population. Higher the population, higher the sampling size. Higher the sampling size. Right. Well, there are different types of population, as we know already. We have infinite sample, we have an infinite population, and we have finite population. So for infinite population, the number of subjects is more. I mean, it goes on increasing. For example, the population of India, population of the world, or number of stars, this is quite infinite in nature. This is what infinite means. Now, if you are picking up certain subjects from these infinite numbers, then obviously our sample size should be on a higher side because our population is infinite. If it is very infinite in nature, then we need to choose a sampling size in such a manner that infinite attributes of that population has to be captured within this sample size. Okay, so that is the essence of choosing the sample size. Now, as a thumb rule, you can just say that probably just because if the sample size is more, then obviously if the population is more, then if the population is infinite, then probably our sample size will be definitely more. On the contrary, if your population is very less, if it is very restricted, then probably that time we might want to choose a very less sample size as well, because a less sample size will definitely attribute for inadequate or less number of samples. Okay, so let's try to fix this up. Okay, this is what we have discussed, and then we have also discussed about we develop a data analysis plan. A data analysis plan consists of a step-by-step process. What we are going to do in the first, what we are going to do in the second stage, what we are going to do in the third stage. Again, for this plan, there has to be a logic. Now, first month, we probably want to understand the title. We want to understand what is the actual problem is. And then we might probably go for a literature review. Let's suppose I want to do a small research. I want to do a small research on if there is any kind of a connection between the GDP and the foreign exchange. Does the GDP has an implication on the foreign exchange? Okay, so this is the kind of research that I'm going to do. What is GDP? We already know. Gross domestic product. Now, gross domestic product increases whenever there is an increase in the production of services, manufacturing. If it increases, then probably that is when our GDP also increases. Well, whenever we are increasing our production, then probably we are releasing a lot of products into the market, and people are buying it. Then people have a lot of money, and they are using it. Then probably these manufacturing companies are drawing a lot of money from the banks. Banks have a lot of money coming from the RBI. In a nutshell, GDP represents high level of monetary, a high level of currency already floating within the market. Probably this has come because probably this has happened because maybe a lot of people are investing into the companies, and companies are manufacturing the product, and they are trying to sell these products in turn to the general public, and they are consuming it. They are consuming it, and they are trying to withdraw the money from the bank. So there is some kind of a circulation that is happening here. So, well, the common sense says that there is a direct relationship between the GDP and foreign exchange. Probably because GDP represents higher circulation of goods and services, and that will happen because of higher circulation of finances. And probably Sensex shows that. Sensex says that a lot of people are investing money back into the company. That itself is an indicator for high liquidity among the consumers, among the general public, and they are investing that liquidity into the market. Well, there is, on the surface of it, there is a kind of a connection. Now, how you are going to plan data analysis for this? Now, let's suppose we try to figure out what is the title, and then the first step is all about we do a literature review. We try to understand what is GDP, what is Sensex, at what times GDP increases, at what time the Sensex increases. We try to understand all the intricacies of these two variables. That is the first step. And that is what is the plan number one. And within this plan, that is the activity number one. Then, going forward, we try to understand what are the different objectives. And then third one, we try to figure out what should be my sample size. What should be my sample size? What should be my sampling process? We try to understand that. And we try to collect different types of data, like primary data, secondary data, and what are the plans for the secondary data collection, what are the plans for the primary data collection, and how we are going to do research analysis. What are the plans? First what we do and demographics, and then followed by simple tests, the statistics, and then we followed by latest analytics tools. Then this is what is the plan. Okay, so the research design should have an elaborately, exclusively mentioned plan listed already. Okay, so this is what is, these are the components of the research design. So we go forward now. Now we try to understand more about these different types of research design that are being discussed already. The first one, we can broadly classify research design into the following three kinds. Okay, the first one is the exploratory research. Okay, so the second one is the descriptive research. The third one is the causal research. And these two together, the descriptive and the causal research together, are known as the conclusive research methods. Having said this, now, what is exploratory research? We are trying to explore without knowing what is the cause of the problem. What could be the repercussions of your research? We don't know that. We are just trying to explore things. That is what exploratory research means. Secondly, these are the two, again, different types of conclusive researches that we have. We will try to understand what are these in a minute. We'll try to understand what are the difference between these two. Okay, so exploratory research and conclusive research. The exploratory research, the objective is to provide insights and understanding. Whereas for the conclusive research, to test the specific hypothesis and examine the kind of relationship that is there between two different variables that we have taken for our discussion. Okay, so let's suppose there is a basic difference here in terms of understanding. Exploratory is we are trying to explore things. We probably want to try to understand things, what a particular phenomena is happening, or what is the co-residence of that phenomenon, what are the reasons why it is happening. We'll try to figure out that in exploratory research, whereas in conclusive research, we are trying to test particular hypothesis, and we are trying to understand the relationship between two different variables. Like I just mentioned earlier, that what's the relationship between GDP and the foreign exchange rates. If the GDP is increasing, and what is its influence on the foreign exchange rates? I mean, is there a kind of a relationship or not? You know, to talk about many other examples, like, you know, is there any kind of a relationship between the employees' satisfaction and the payment? Is there any kind of a relationship between the sales and the advertisement expenditure? Is there any kind of a relationship between the quality of the product and the use? Is there any kind of a relationship between the price and the sales? Is there any kind of a relationship between the distribution efficiency and the sales? So there's such kind of causal researches where we test specific hypotheses that is taken up in conclusive research. All right. So what are the characteristics of exploratory research? Okay. What exploratory research stands for, basically? Here, this information is needed, defined is very loosely. Research process is quite flexible in nature and it's quite unstructured, and sample size is very small and may not be representative as well. Analysis of primary data is qualitative in nature. So exploratory research is not a very in-depth kind of research here. This is something which is very loosely defined, because we don't know what we are probably trying to find out. We may not be completely aware about the objectives of what research that we are going to conduct. We probably may not be knowing that, and therefore the information needed is defined only loosely. Okay, and then in research process is quite flexible and it's quite unstructured in nature. Okay, so we don't have plan 1, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4 like that in exploratory research, because we are trying to explore things, explore the possibilities, and we never know in what direction our research will take us to. So we cannot predetermine, confirm that, you know, this is the exact process within which we are going to follow. We cannot say that. So therefore, it is like very unstructured and highly flexible in nature. And sample is very small because we don't know. We are trying to understand certain things. Let's suppose, you know, exploratory research. You know, is it feasible for me to do business in a state like Bihar? I'm trying to explore things. And my sample size in this case has to be very less because we are trying to explore something which is unknown. Okay, so that could be one of the parameter here in this case of exploratory research. Now, given that sample size is very small, it might indicate us, it might tell us that, you know, exploratory research may not be very, very valid in nature in terms of findings, because our sampling size is terribly low. Okay, so we might not, and these samples may not be a complete representation. They may not represent the entire population as well. So yes, analysis of primary data is qualitative in nature. So whereas in terms of conclusive research, if you just take, for example, the information needed is quite clearly defined. What sort of information that I'm trying to understand, and what sort of information that I'm trying to measure, that is clearly, very much clearly defined and defined. And then let's suppose, you know, I want to do a research on price and sales. So in this case, I would collect all the information in terms of changes, fluctuations in terms of pricing. At the same time, all the information related to the sales, I would collect that beforehand. So what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to define my information clarity. Second one is research process. The research process is quite formal and quite structural in nature. It's quite formal in nature. So in terms of conclusive research, we basically do a cause and effect kind of research. So here in this case, here in this case, it's quite you know, what you say is quite formal in nature, quite systematic in nature. All right. Sample size is very, very high and completely representative of the population. Here in this case, the sample size is very hard, friends, because you know we are trying to understand, we are doing a conclusive research. Conclusive research technically speaks about, you know, cause and effects of between two variables, how these two variables they enact between each other. And in order to establish that kind of a relationship between these two variables, probably we might need a huge number of population or a huge number of samples to be drawn from that huge population. Okay, so therefore, it has been mentioned here that, you know, sample size is very large and the sample has to be complete representative of the population, without which we will incur lot of errors doing the research. And the data analysis that we adopt here in this case is quite quantitative in nature. It's all number-driven research, friends. All right. Now, findings and results are quite tentative in nature because we never know. We set out to explore certain things, then probably we might end up not finding anything at all. Then, in that case, the findings and the results becomes quite tentative in nature. We may not know, we may not get the answer for our research because we are trying to explore. And our exploratory behavior may not lead to any kind of conclusive result. But in case of this research, conclusive research, the findings is very conclusive in nature. It decides, let's suppose I am doing a small research on a relationship between the price and the sales. It conclusively says that yes, there is a relationship between the price and the sales. There is a hypothesis which tested and the result says that there is a direct relationship between the price and the sales. It says that way. Okay. Outcome in this case is exploratory and then, you know, probably conclusive. Findings used as input in decision making. Here, what we do here in this case of conclusive research is that we use this finding for making a managerial decisions. But in this case, we try to, whatever the findings that we get from the research, we probably do a more exploratory research on that, or we probably might end up doing a conclusive research based on the findings. Well, friends, so this is what is the difference between the exploratory and the conclusive research. Let's try to understand what are the different choices of research design that we have. Our research design specifies the methods and procedures for conducting a particular study. Research designs can be grouped into three different categories. The first one is the exploratory research. Well, this kind of research focused on discovery of idea. It is preliminary investigation which does not have a rigid design. We are trying to explore things, as we earlier mentioned. We are trying to do, let's suppose, you know, how the customers would respond in case, you know, if I start spending more on advertisements on social media. What is the repercussions of this? What is the repercussions of this if I start investing more money on social media advertisement? How the customers are going to react to that? We are trying to explore here, isn't it? We are trying to explore here. You know, that is what is exploratory research is all about. We might conduct an exploratory research on how a product positioning might really work out. You know, if we position it as a premium product, you know, how the customers are going to absorb that idea of having a premium product. Okay, so, you know, this is what is exploratory means. A researcher in this case may change the focus as a result of the new ideas and relationship among the variables. Let's talk about descriptive research. The descriptive research is a study undertaken when the researcher wants to study the choice of certain groups, age groups, education level, income, occupation, etc. Exploratory studies are well structured in nature. In this case of descriptive research studies are very well structured. You know, we are trying to describe the kind of research that we have taken here. We're trying to describe it. How are we going to describe it? What is the kind of research that I'm doing? What is the possible target customers that I'm approaching? And what could be the sales of that target customers and things like that? We are trying to describe the phenomena here. Okay, so that is all about the descriptive research. Causal research, it is undertaken to study the cause and effect relationship between the different variables here. All right, let's try to understand. Let's try to compare the basic research designs here. You know, this will give us a rough idea about how all these three different types of research designs can be compared, you know, on a same plane. Now, what are the objectives of exploratory research? As we earlier mentioned, discover ideas and insights. That is the first, that is what is the objective here in case of exploratory research. Now we go forward and we try to understand for the descriptive, it is describing the market characteristics or even the functions. That's what descriptive research says. Then you go one step ahead and try to understand what is the causal research, which is nothing but the objective here is to determine the cause and effect relationship between these different variables that we have undertaken. Okay, now these are the objectives. See, these three different researchers with the different designs have got three different approaches. Now, based on the kind of research that we are going to do, we probably want to choose one of these different basic research designs. We may not definitely choose all of them, and you know, we might have to choose only just one of them, which suits our research title the best. That is always chosen here. Okay, let's try to compare the basic research designs. What are the characteristics here? Well, the exploratory is quite flexible in nature. It's quite versatile in nature. It's often the front end of the total research design. So before conducting the descriptive or causal research, we usually go for exploratory research. And that's why it is said that it is the front end of total research design. So before conducting actual research, probably we might want to do the exploratory research and find out what is exactly the kind of research that we might want to choose from. Okay, now next, what are the characteristics for descriptive research? Well, it is marked by prior formulation of specific hypothesis, and it's quite pre-planned and structured design we follow in case of descriptive research. Well, it's quite pre-planned and quite structured in its approach. What does it mean by pre-planned and quite structured in its approach? Well, you know, once we describe, you know, let's suppose, you know, I want to find out what is the kind of customers that I should be looking for my particular product. Let's suppose I'm going to launch a new product in the market. And I need to figure out who are my target customers should be. And for that, I need to conduct segmentation, targeting, and segmentation and targeting. Basically, these are the two different functions that we need to conduct first. Now, in order to do the segmentation, probably we might have to describe each of those segments. And that is where this one finds a lot of applications. Whenever we are trying to describe certain things, whether it is related to a customer profile, whether it is related to a product profile, whether it is related to a promotional mix profile, whenever we are trying to describe certain things, that is when we use descriptive research. Okay. Well, that's why it is said that it is pre-planned. Without planning, how are you going to analyze? Certainly. Without planning, it's very difficult to tackle how you are going to describe, on what basis, what is the foundation. That has to be pre-planned. And then, it is quite a structured design in itself. Okay, well, that is what is descriptive research is all about. But then, we go forward and try to understand what is causal research. It's all about the manipulation of one or more independent variables. We try to manipulate and try to see what are the different types of independent variable and dependent variable, what sort of a relationship between these two is existing. Is there any kind of a relationship between independent and the dependent? Whether the independent is a dependent or dependent is an independent, we try to find out that one here in this case of by doing manipulation of one or more independent variables. And apart from that, here we can just introduce different controls for other mediating variables as well. Okay, now let's try to understand what are the different methods that has been used by these three different research designs. Let's talk about exploratory research and what are the different methods that we use. The first one is expert surveys. In certain areas, we try to fix experts. Experts could be experts in the sense an expert of a subject matter expert could be an expert of economics, an expert could be of industrial output or industrial production, and some kind of an expert survey. Expert surveys, you're basically trying to exert a kind of a survey amongst the experts. Okay, so that is what is expert surveys means. Then we go forward and try to understand what are pilot surveys. Pilot surveys are small surveys undertaken for a very small sample size. Pilot surveys are nothing but, you are trying to do a trial and error before undertaking a big time research for a huge number of people, employing a huge number of people to collect that information. Before you do that, before you spend money on collecting information, what researchers do is they choose a very less samples and they try to collect information from those samples, and they try to see if we can achieve our objectives with a given kind of questionnaire. Are the questionnaires are understood by the respondents? If it is yes, then yes, that is very good news. If it is no, then where are the difficulties that have been observed? Where are the difficulties that have been observed? I mean, where we can see the difficulties here? Okay, so that is one criteria. Okay, so pilot surveys are conducted in order to save the cost. By conducting a research survey on a huge scale and investing a lot of money by conducting a research on a huge scale and making a lot of mistakes to avoid such kind of a very embarrassing situation, we do conduct research on a very small scale. And that is what is known as pilot survey. Okay, instead of undertaking the survey of all 60 students, I do a survey of only 10 students. That is what is pilot surveys. Okay, so in case of exploratory research, the kind of secondary data is always analyzed qualitatively, and exploratory methods are usually we use qualitative methods. We have now qualitative methods are nothing but they don't represent the numbers as such. One of the new things that have come these days is all about the text analysis. The text analysis, the reviews that you write on the websites. There are sophisticated softwares which will take these texts from there, and then they try to come up with something called a sentimental index. And this sentimental index probably will tell us whether the service that has been there on the website, whether it was good service or not. Okay, so now what are the methods that are being adopted in case of descriptive research? Well, there are many methods. The first one is the secondary data analysis. As mentioned earlier, we do surveys, we do panel surveys, we also do observational and other data research as well. And in causal research, we do conduct experiments. This is, let's throw more light on this one here as to what is exploratory research as such. Now, this is generally used to clarify thoughts and opinions, okay, about research problem or the respondent population, is to provide insights on how to do more conclusive research. As a matter of example, a focus group discussion among the housewives and debate to the future of convenience foods in India. It may be used to throw ideas about the new products here. You know, you probably want to find out what the customers think about the new products, and for that we might probably conduct an exploratory research. So in this case, a group of housewives are doing a debate on future convenience foods in India. How a food could be very convenient for cooking purpose, and that is debated upon, and that is one of the examples for developing or coming up with new products here. Or it might even suggest modifications to the existing products through freewheeling discussion. You know, you might capture people are discussing about certain things, about a certain product idea, and there is a lot of freewheeling is happening. I mean, everybody is expressing their own concerns about it, and you know, if you are trying to capture that, then probably that is an exploratory research characteristics. Okay, so oftentimes it so happens that the researcher is new to the problem, either because the product or the brand is new to him, or the researcher is studying it for the first time. In such cases, the first studies tend to be exploratory in nature. If the researcher is involved with the research for the first time, that is when we need to conduct an exploratory research. This gives us a fair bit of an idea about what the customer thinks about a particular product. Only after some experiences with the product category, the researcher's confidence grows to design what can be termed as the causal research study, where a more direct link between the cause and the effect can be established here. Okay, this is very straightforward here. In this case, after certain experience with the product category, the researcher's confidence will grow, definitely. And now, this confidence will grow because, you know, the person who is doing the research will gather a lot of information about the product. As a result of that, he will get to know how to use it properly, how you are trying to he's trying to use it, and things like that. You know, here, as a result of knowing more and more about it, probably they will get to know different variables which are at play, and then that is when they start doing causal research, where more direct link between cause and effect can be established here. Okay, so let's go to the next one. What is the hypothesis? One major application of exploratory research, therefore, is to generate hypotheses for the studies. As a result of exploratory research, we might end up doing a lot of exploration of different possibilities. Now, these possibilities can be related to product features, acceptability by the customer, and acceptability of the price, even the promotion, types, there can be n number of hypotheses that can be generated for the future studies as a result of exploratory research methods. Okay. Okay. Let's suppose a group of housewives are having a freewheeling discussion. Now, during this freewheeling discussion, they might probably come up with saying that the cut vegetables are more better and they should be packaged in a cold store so that that can be reused again and again. So we might not say we may not get this straight. During the exploratory research, probably the proper pricing of these buying price for a particular cut vegetables can be decided, like say 45 to 50 rupees, and we don't know whatever that these people are discussing holds good for the entire population or not. In that circumstances, we need to set the hypothesis, saying that this product sells at a very optimal way if we price between 45 to 50 rupees. Okay, so one of the major application of exploratory research is nothing but hypothetical formulation. Hypotheses are what? These are assumptions. We assume that GDP and foreign exchange, they go hand in hand. That's an assumption. We assume that the increase in the price will decrease the sales. A decrease in the sales is the repercussion of an increase in the price. That is just an assumption, and we need to prove or disprove these assumptions by conducting the research. All right. The methods used in exploratory research can be ranged from usual surveys to focus groups to consultations with experts in the field to analyze of selected cases. Example, to study the 3 different companies' best salespeople and the 3 of the worst to try and figure out what drives the sales of the products and other motivations. This could help in designing a study of customers to find out more from them. So what is happening here is to study 3 of the company's best salespeople and 3 of the worst, and to try to figure out what drives the sales of the product and their motivation. Exploratory research could be used for any of the following purposes. There could be n number of places where exploratory research can be used. The first one could be to formulate the problem or define the problem more precisely. And the second possible place where it can find its own application is to identify different alternative courses of action. Now, to elaborate this one, let's suppose a company would like to create a product. Now, there are many alternatives here. Whether this product can be outsourced for manufacturing by some XYZ vendor. That is option number 1. Option number 2 is, you develop this product and set up a manufacturing setup in your own company. That is the option number 2. Option number 3 is to import this product from some foreign country. So now these are the 3 different alternatives, and which is the alternative which can give us the good return on investments. To figure that out, probably that is when we use exploratory research. Okay, now we go forward and try to understand, as we earlier mentioned and discussed, that exploratory research can be used and very detrimental in developing different hypotheses, which are, in other words, assumptions. And as a result of exploratory research, we probably will get to know gain certain insights, and we gain certain basic understandings, and we can use these basic understandings and for developing our own assumptions or hypotheses. And apart from that, exploratory research could be also used to isolate key variables and relationship for further examination. And we might know that the sales could decline for various reasons. It could be because of poor pricing. It could be because of poor people management. It could be because of competition. It could be because of quality is detriment. We don't know. Okay, so now you do the exploratory research to find out what is the exact cause of the sales decline, and then that relationship could be taken up for further research. Let's suppose, by doing our exploratory research, we find out that the product quality is the main reason for decline in the sales. The product quality is going down because of faulty or inadequate or very poor quality materials that are being outsourced for production. So here we have a direct connection between the vendors as well as the sales. So this kind of things, here we are trying to isolate the key variables. I isolated the price influence on the sale. I isolated people's influence on the sale. I isolated competition influence on the sale. I isolated promotion influence on the sale. Now what I left with is the product quality. Now here I am sure that as a result of this exploratory research, I could find that out that the poor product quality is the reason behind poor sales. Now that's the beauty of this exploratory research. Now exploratory research can be used, it gains insight for developing an approach to the problem. It establishes priorities for further research as well. Okay, let's go to the next different types of methods for exploratory research. These are some of the methods: survey of experts, pilot surveys, secondary data analysis in qualitative way, and qualitative research as well. So more on this we will just discuss in the next class. Until then, thank you.